Hey, this is Shelby Abbott, and this is a bonus episode in your Family Life Today podcast feed, so you're welcome. This episode is from one of our other shows on the Family Life Podcast Network called Married with Benefits. It's hosted by Brian Goins, and Season 4 is going to drop in the next few weeks. It features Harvard-trained researcher Shaunti Feldhahn and her research that she turned into a book called The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages, the little things that make a big difference. So now's the time to subscribe to Family Life's Married with Benefits wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube so you won't miss when Season 4 debuts. And until then, you can check out previous seasons with topics like questions every wife is asking, questions every husband is asking, and there's even an entire season on questions every couple is asking about sexual intimacy. So check those episodes out while you wait for Season 4 to drop. And also, as I mentioned before, here's a new bonus episode of Married with Benefits. It's with Brad Wilcox. He's the director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, and he's got some great insights on why we should think highly of marriage and not buy into negative stereotypes. So check that out now, or you can see this episode and all of Season 4 on Family Life's YouTube page. Either way, enjoy.
All right, we get to start this special episode of Married with Benefits.
I am so excited about this.
I know this is kind of an unexpected joy. And, you know, we talk about Married with Benefits. Some of us that are listening are like, man, it's been a little while since you had Season 3, which was last year.
I know. It's been a minute.
We're kind of on a yearly podcast season basis, but we all are about rediscovering the joys of saying I do. And as we were recording and putting together Season 4 of Married with Benefits, which should air in the next couple of weeks after this one drops, it's going to be one of my favorites because we're all about learning about the pro tips from the all-star couples based upon that a lot came out of your book, The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages.
Yep.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. But in that process, we decided, well, we should call the guru of the guy that actually understands why there is benefits to being married to speak on some of those episodes. But then we're like, why would we just have him answer a couple questions? Could we at least get a little bit of time with him, especially in light of the fact that he's just written a book on this very topic? And so we have this unbelievable opportunity to talk with Dr. Brad Wilcox, who's a renowned sociologist in the area of marriage and family. He's a sociology professor at UVA, director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia, and one of the founders of the Institute for Family Studies, which I get that email. It's an incredible email that comes out weekly, just giving great studies and research. In fact, Dr. Wilcox, tell us a little bit about that email itself and why it's so helpful.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we have this email that comes out on Friday mornings, basically, and it just kind of summarizes some key findings that we've seen in the research on marriage and parenthood. And then also it spotlights 4 blog articles that we run Monday through Thursday on FamilyStudies.org that tackle kind of how to be a good parent, you know, what is the key to a strong marriage, look at things like infidelity and sexual satisfaction, just kind of all of the issues that kind of are important, I think, for today's couples and parents. So again, FamilyStudies.org is the place to go to get that.
FamilyStudies.org.
Can I just say, I'm so sorry. The thing that I love about everything that Brad does is because he is one of the foremost researchers. And me being a social researcher, I am so sorry. I'm totally fangirling here. Like, Brad, I'm so thrilled to have you on here because the stuff that he has been doing and has been doing for years is truly based on, okay, what is the empirical data? Like, what does the actual data say? Not opinion. And all of the things that he talks about are those things that backs up for us, for people of faith, what the Bible has said all along. I just love it. So.
Yeah. So he'd be one of your guys where, like, if you had 3 people around for a dinner.
Oh, yes.
This would be one of them right now. So.
Well, actually, he was in one of my prior research projects. I'm like, there's nobody else that I want to talk to first other than Brad. So, yes.
Oh, that's great. Well, we want to get into your book here in just a minute. It's making all the rounds. You can see it right behind his shoulder if you're watching this on YouTube right now. But it's hitting all the big markets, all the big news channels, and it's got an incredible title, which is just it's Get Married. I mean, right out of the gate, Get Married: Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization, which is quite a brand promise, by the way.
Yeah.
that you believe. Before we get into that, though, tell us a little bit about your own family life. Married, how long? Kids?
So I've been married 28 years to Danielle, and we've got 9 children. We adopted 5 kids. Thought we couldn't have children biologically. And God has a sense of humor. And so my wife got pregnant with twins after we adopted 5 kids. And we went from 3 to 7 kids from 2007 December. We brought Jonas and Simone home from Ethiopia in 2007 December. And then we had the twins in November of 2009. And so I talked in the book about how I was completely stressed out in 2009 as the father of now 7 children, including baby twins. And I mean, I'm ashamed, but I have to acknowledge that at that point in 2009, I was more stressed out about all of this than my wife was. And here she was having just given birth to twins, But it was the recession, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to support, 7 kids? And but obviously we've survived all that. And I talk in the book too about how one of those twins now comes around every night and finds me and gives me like a kiss on the forehead or a hug. So it just kind of goes to show that, you can have these tough moments as parents, and then you're grateful beyond measure, right? In this case, my case, 14 years later.
Brad, as we think about this, it seems like in our culture, we love weddings. We love the wedding day. We love to plan them. We love to promote them. We love to watch them on TV, put them on magazines. But then all of a sudden, it feels like our culture portrays marriage like a life sentence with no parole. And you seem to be writing an exact opposite of that. If anything, our culture views, they overrate the wedding day and they underrate the marriage. This book that you've written goes against that directly. So for you, do you feel like you're selling that too strongly? I mean, you're saying save civilization. I mean, that's a big brand promise.
Yeah, well, I think there are 2 key points to make here right out of the gate. So the first point is that we're getting a lot of negative messages about marriage and parenthood, really from the mainstream left and now from the online right. So the New York Times, for instance, had this piece that said, married motherhood in America is a game no one wins. Okay, so kind of painting marriage as a path to misery. Bloomberg had a piece that said women who stay single are getting richer, kind of painting marriage as a path to immiseration. And then, of course, Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis on the online right are saying that for men, marriage is a terrible deal. In fact, Pearl said it is a death sentence for men. So again, a lot of negative voices out there from both the left and the right, and yet the data tell us something that's very different. What they tell us is that there is no group of men and women today who are happier, especially kind of as they hit midlife, like I'm in midlife now, than married moms and married dads. So as tough as it can be to be a father and a mother, we all know, crying babies, late nights.
I was going to say, you know better than most, 9 times. Good night.
Teenagers who are, having whatever kind of issue. It's tough, no doubt about that. But you got to think about kind of like Churchill talked about democracy. Like democracy is like the worst form of government except when you compare the alternatives, right? And so I think we have to recognize and appreciate, being a spouse, being a parent, these are all hard things, but the kind of meaning and direction that your life, I think, enjoys, the sense of like having someone to love and to love you, kind of day in and day out, is just kind of, you just can't kind of really fully appreciate that, I think, until you kind of invest in marriage and family. And we do see, again, that married moms are about twice as likely to be very happy compared to single and childless women. And married dads are more than twice as likely to be very happy with their lives compared to single and childless men. So that's what the data tell us.
So one of the things that I love about this is that this gives some really concrete answers to people like, and I won't say who this is because this is public, but to a young woman I know who is, I think, 26. I want to say 26. And I asked her, and she's very close. I love her. I adore her. But when I asked her, do you want to get married someday? And this was maybe a year and a half ago. Do you want to get married someday? Do you want to have kids? She was like, oh, are you kidding? Like, what? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Like, why would I bother doing this? And because there's this cynicism. And then I said, okay, let me ask you another question. Imagine that I could wave a magic wand and I could tell you, you know what? If you get married to this, particular right guy, if you get married to this particular person, whatever, that I can tell you that you are going to have a strong and happy marriage for the rest of your life. It won't mean there won't be problems, there won't be challenges, but that I could tell you, you will probably be in a strong and happy marriage for the rest of your life. Then would you want to get married? Oh, of course. Like, of course I would. Like,
Right.
why wouldn't I? And what I love about this, Brad, is that you're giving us the data to say, well, guess what? That's actually the norm.
Yeah, but it's a great story, actually, Shaunti, because I think it kind of really gets at one of the core challenges facing us as a culture and that is that people have seen so many bad examples, either in their own families or in their own friendship networks, that really make them fearful about kind of investing in love and investing in marriage. And then, but I think the crazy thing here is then they do things that only kind of make things worse no, but I'm serious. Like, there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out about a week ago. It was written by one of their finance columnists, and she was saying that she was seeing a lot of her peers get divorced, and so she and her partner were kind of basically commit to kind of keeping their checking accounts separate because, things could always go south. And what she doesn't really fully, I think, appreciate is that we know that couples who have joint accounts are more likely not only to be happily married, but to avoid divorce court. And I think it's basically about kind of being all in.
Right.
And if you're all into your marriage, if you're kind of fully vested, you've kind of burned the boats behind you, so to speak, to use that ancient, classical idea, or you've kind of burned the bridge, behind you, you're going to be all in and you're going to kind of invest fully. And so unfortunately, a lot of people have seen, bad things happen in their own world, and they're getting also kind of unhelpful messages from a lot of our elites. And so they're only kind of digging their hole deeper. And what we're trying to do, obviously all of us here today, is to kind of give them some constructive advice about how to forge a strong, simple marriage that will kind of give you the kind of outcome that young woman actually would like in her deepest heart of hearts.
Well, and that's really what we're about at Married with Benefits is we do want to rediscover those benefits. And so, because even as you were talking, it reminded me of the football team that's ahead at the end of the game, and then they go into prevent defense. And it's amazing how many of those teams lose. And it seems like that's what couples are doing is they have all this pomp and circumstance around the wedding day, but then they mitigate against this eventual possible, death sentence or whatever you might call it. So what are some ways that you've seen and the research has shown that shows what helps couples actually experience those benefits?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I talk about in the book. I talk about kind of 5 C's in terms of the importance of communion, children, commitment, cash, and community. And let me just kind of talk about 4 out of those 5, just to kind of keep us moving quickly. So on the community piece, it's really important, especially for I think husbands, to try to be kind of emotionally engaged on a regular basis, to kind of make that effort to be empathetic, affectionate, attentive. And after the wedding day, a lot of guys just aren't as, they're not as attentive, they're not as romantic. And so concretely, one of the things that I suggest is to have a regular date night. It's a way for couples just to, connect romantically and emotionally, kind of talk about their dreams, their hopes, put aside the kids, put aside the financial concerns, all that stuff, and just kind of, think big, have fun, do whatever, just to kind of, rekindle that novelty and romance that keeps that spark alive. So that's one C. Go ahead.
Hey, Brad, real quick, I want to get to the other ones, but can you double click on that? Because I even just read the chapter on just being attentive, and in our culture, it's never been more easy to be distracted. So when a husband hears that, it's like it's super easy to say that, but then what do we need to make sure that we do around us to create an environment of attentiveness? Any tips on that, especially for us guys?
So yeah, I think one thing that we can do is, this is true for both husbands and wives, is to kind of have a charging station in like your kitchen, for instance. And when you come in the door, just put your phone in the charging mode, put it down, put it away. And, I think trying to minimize screens, tablets, all that kind of stuff. So it's just important to kind of just connect with your wife, with your husband, when you come home from work or whatever else it might be. And, make that effort to kind of have that eye to eye, contact and, face to face and like real communication. Now, obviously a lot of things when you've got kids, other things going on, but just to sort of.
How did you do that with 9 kids? Seriously, get real with us.
Well, but
I was just thinking the same thing.
No, and we still have a bunch of kids at home. No, so it's a struggle, but I'm just saying, like, you try to make time, especially at the end of the night, I think, after the kids are down or whatever else, or when they're doing their own thing, to just have that eye-to-eye time, and, maybe a snack, dessert, a glass of wine, whatever it is. So that's one thing. But then I would say too, like we've been very, almost religious about having a date night, usually on Friday night or Saturday night. So we just get out. We have a babysitter, or in-laws. My in-laws come, whatever, and just make sure that we're kind of getting out and rekindling that romance. So I think that's really important for couples if they can make time and afford to do something, or just keep it simple,
Yeah.
So,
okay, communion. So that's the first one. That's great.
So
Love that.
The third C is about commitment. And, what we see in the data is that kind of having the sense that your spouse is fully committed to you is just a huge predictor of marital happiness. That's sort of one way of thinking about it. But more concretely, I would also say kind of make sure the D word is not part of your conversation or thinking. I'm obviously mentioning divorce here.
Right.
So you're kind of you're not letting the inevitable challenges and difficulties, disappointments kind of, make you think about an exit. That's really important. Fidelity too, obviously both in-person fidelity, kind of steering clear of attractive alternatives in the workplace, in your social circle, whatever it might be. But especially now too, thinking about that online. There are so many opportunities to kind of meet people online today, or, look at stuff you shouldn't be looking at. And so just being really intentional about sort of honoring your spouse by not watching and not engaging people who are going to be a threat to your marriage. So
I want to jump on that one. I just heard a divorce lawyer had written a book about how to help people not get into his office.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he talked about how if I was writing a program that would almost guarantee divorce, it would be Facebook, because it is one of those things where he sees people coming in, and that's exactly what they do. They end up having a struggle in their marriage, having some issue, and they get attracted by some grass is greener on the other side, without understanding that there's a circus over there that you're just not even seeing.
Yeah.
And so to be able to have the realistic expectations of, if this is going to work, we got to be, as you said, all in. It's that covenant idea that we talk about a lot here.
Yep.
So yeah, that's exactly right. The grass is green on the other side of the fence is sort of the illusion people have, and then of course they get into huge trouble. The 4C is about cash and just recognizing that having a steady income stream is valuable. Having shared assets as a couple is incredibly valuable too, in terms of kind of making your marriage financially stronger. And what's striking here is that what I found in my more recent research is that whether the wife works or not outside the home, not a big deal. But when the husband is not employed full time, we see that couples are a lot more likely to get into trouble. And so in particular, there's a new study from Harvard that shows that when she loses her job, no effect on divorce risk. But when he loses his job, it increases their divorce risk by 33%. So the point here simply is that, and this is 2024, I know lots changed, but it's still the case that for both, I think, men and women, there's kind of an expectation that he's going to be a financial kind of rock for the family. And especially when there are kids in the mix, if he is not kind of doing all that he can, obviously people lose their job, that's fine, right?
Sure.
But if he does lose his job, like he's in it, trying to find something new, and that he's just trying to be, basically a hardworking, responsible guy who can be, a financial kind of rock for a family.
Can I jump in here?
Go, yeah, please.
My thought, I've got all kinds of things running through my head, but yes, go ahead.
See, because this is actually one of the things we've actually studied in the research. And Brad, one of the things that you're probably not aware of is that Jeff, my husband, and I, one of our research studies a number of years ago was for a book called Thriving in Love and Money. And so we did some nationally representative surveys, et cetera, like we normally do. And one of the things that we found that resonates with that, but maybe not for the same reason as you might think, is that it wasn't just, he lost his job and he's no longer the provider. And that actually what happens is that more emotionally impacts him.
Right.
Now, it impacts both of them, but it impacts him. And often the husband will go into the black cloud of doom, right? And he'll be in a bad mood. He'll be stressed all the time. And suddenly the wife feels, not only have we lost a primary source of income, I've lost my husband. I've lost our togetherness. I've lost this, happy guy that, we used to be together. And suddenly he's not co-parenting anymore. And he's just, because he's so stressed. And one of the things that we found in the research is that it actually helps the average, responsible husband, who he wants another job,
sure,
right? He's trying, but it actually helps him to know that what's more valuable for her in most cases, statistically, according to this national survey, is that 70% of married women said, if I have to, now I don't want to, but if I have to, I will actually give up the financial security if it means that I can have him, like if I have the relationship security. And that's something that takes a bit of the pressure off and makes the waiting season more manageable.
Yeah.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and with that, I'll just one more thought on that, because I mean, I could imagine you as an academic talking about these in the circles that you're in, which tends to be more elite, tends to be more left-leaning, that they would say, well, that's just a cultural construct. You're talking about, stay-at-home dads could be fine. They do, and that seems to be the thing that we're pushing now, almost as a culture. Are you reacting against that and just saying, well, the data is showing something just very different?
Yeah. So and I know guys who've been stay-at-home dads and are, great marriages, great families. So obviously there are, exceptions. But what I am saying here is that I think it's important, really even in a cross-cultural sense, to kind of give men a distinctive role when it comes to the family. It doesn't have to be 1955, but just to kind of give, the husband and father something kind of that's sort of his set of things to do. And so that kind of allows for him to have a certain degree of respect in the home, a certain sense of his own distinctive mission that he's going to kind of buy into. And when I talk to women who are unhappy in their marriages, they often have kind of like a 50-50 mindset, and they can kind of chronicle all the ways in which their husband's kind of not measuring up to their standards for how to divide things up. And I think what they don't appreciate is that, not that I want the guy to be coming home and sitting on the couch. What I would suggest to them, though, is just kind of like divide things up. I'm not saying that you're going to divide everything up and there are going to be things you're going to share, no doubt. But to kind of try to figure out ways to kind of give the husband and the wife kind of separate things to do in the household. And it might be, for instance, the husband is the primary cook. That's fine, I don't care. But still going to give him a distinctive, identity and role in the home. It's going to be good for the marriage. It's going to be good for his sense of self-worth, and just kind of clarity. And I think the 50-50 trap often is one that makes everyone upset. And it's often the case that the husband never really measures up to his wife's standards for a certain set of, family-related tasks.
Yeah. Man, now you're starting to read my mail. So let's get off of that. Let's get back into the social sciences of it. So we're talking about communion with each other. We're talking about commitment, talking about cash. And then what's this fourth one you want to mention?
Community. And I think we have to recognize that birds of a feather flock together, And so you can tell a lot about a couple and their success in marriage based upon their friends. And if their friends, are bickering, if their friends are talking down their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend, if their friends have kind of a negative attitude about marriage or the opposite sex, if their friends are doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, we'll just kind of leave that vague, right? We all know what I'm talking about. Yep. Then your odds of succeeding in your marriage are pretty darn low. But by contrast, if your friends are kind of living a more family first, what I call marriage, if they're kind of just committed to marriage and family in general, you're more likely to be flourishing. And what I find, of course, is that religious couples are more likely to have those kinds of friends. And so concretely, what I find is that religious couples are about 15 percentage points more likely to be very happy compared to secular couples. They're about 30 to 50% less likely to get divorced compared to secular couples. And what's most striking about all this adult research in my book is that today, 2/3 of religious couples have sex at least once a week. Compared to less than...
Wait, let's get to church, people.
Well, no, I'm seriously, compared to less than half of secular couples. I mean, I was just blown away. This is new. So back in 2000, there was no gap in sexual frequency by religiosity. There is today. It's striking. And I mean, we can talk about why that's the case, but it's just worth underlining that, having a community of people who are kind of with you and for you in your marriage and family, who identify with virtues like forgiveness, who think it's important to be generous in marriage, who understand that this is a for life thing. There's something about that that's linked to, happier marriages, more stable marriages, and for, I think, some important reason, more sex today.
Well, I think about those 4 C's that you're talking about, with all of those, if you're having communion with one another, if you reinforce that commitment, if there's a sense of shared responsibilities, and there's other friends that you have that are helping build into you, sex becomes that great expression of a happy life, of a more satisfying relationship. And so it's natural then that you would experience that, which goes against everything that's been in the media since I was a kid of the 80s. It's like you go back to Footloose, You go back to any movie that
Totally.
we watch, and it paints as if you're in church, you're a prude, and you never have sex.
Church lady.
Or only have it for kids. Yeah, church lady, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a great, I mean, the Footloose, that's another good example. So I think there is, and there's been recent story, I mean, there was a story in the New Yorker, it's just like amazing, that kind of painted evangelical Christian men as like these porn-addled guys who were guilty and their wives were upset with them, and there was like all this divorce. And of course, don't get me wrong, particularly for Christian men, for Catholic men, whatever, Jewish men, if you take your faith seriously and you're using pornography, on a regular basis, that's going to be, I think, a cause for, some guilt and tension maybe in your marriage, no doubt. But what they kind of lost in their coverage of this issue is that in general, number one, religious men use pornography a lot less than secular men. And that secondly, because they endow, and their wives endow sex with a degree of sacredness, and then marriage more generally with sacredness, they're more likely to enjoy sex and have more of it. And that kind of story was completely lost in this recent New Yorker story.
Wow.
Which is why I'm so glad that we have Brad here.
Right.
To be able to record this and to capture all of this truth, because honestly, I think the Family Life audience needs to know this. They need to stop looking at what people who actually haven't done the research and don't know the truth are saying and adopting it as real. Like, one of our episodes, we're talking about the whole myth, the concept of the rate of divorce is the same in the church and how that's such a strong urban legend and it's completely not true. And so to be able to, I'm just going to encourage all my fellow Family Life listeners to just recognize, no, this is an opportunity for you to embrace the benefits of and the truth, the good news truth about marriage.
Can you say that stat one more time about religious folks? That
religious men use porn.
Well, not that one.
Okay.
I meant the one about less divorce. You talked about there was.
So what we see in the research that I've done and that Tyler Vanderweel at Harvard has done is that religious Americans are about 30 to 50% less likely to get divorced. Now, what's striking too about our findings, both Tyler's work at Harvard and my work at the University of Virginia, is that we're probably undercounting here because we're talking about just looking at individuals. We're not looking at what we call dyadic data. I don't have in this particular analysis data on the spouse's religious attendance. So what we're saying is just if you attend church regularly, in my data, you're 30% less likely to get divorced. In Tyler's data at Harvard, he finds that women he's looking at are 50% less likely to get divorced over time if they're regular churchgoers, right? So if you're both, though, attending church, my suspicion is that your risk of divorce is even lower than what we're finding in two different data sets.
And you're talking about more than just the CEO Christians, right? More than just the Christmas, Easter only. You're talking about on a regular basis, right? Yeah, that
so
are
several
times,
several times a month or more. So that's the kind of church going I'm talking about.
That's great.
Yep.
I know we have a few more minutes with you, Brad, but I love your chapter on We Before Me. You talk a little bit about being in community. We've got a new video series on marriage called The Art of Marriage that just released for Family Life. And it really helps encourage couples get together and actually talk about everything that you're talking about. How do we stay committed to one another? How do we talk about roles well? How do we actually have the conversations we most need to have about marriage? And one of the guys on there talks about what if the health of your marriage wasn't measured by what you're getting from your spouse, but by what you're giving to your spouse? What if you started measuring your health of your marriage by what you're actually contributing? And that's really what this We Before Me talks about. Could you just speak to a few words about just that, what your findings in couples that actually sacrifice for one another?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. So I did some research a number of years ago looking at marital generosity, doing things like, making coffee for your spouse in the morning or gassing up their car, at night, whatever, just like little things to kind of signal that you're thinking about them, that you take them seriously. And what I found was that being the recipient of generosity in marriage, in these kinds of acts of service, also included forgiveness in the way that I measured it, was a huge predictor of being happier in your marriage. But even more than being the recipient of generosity, I found that actually being generous towards your spouse was an even better predictor of your happiness in marriage. So it just kind of reminds us that we are kind of designed, we're built to be generous, to kind of, in a sense, to live with and for others. And marriage is, for most of us, kind of the easiest way to kind of experience that reality of generosity and kind of working and living with the other. So there's just no question that, a lot of the messages in the culture are telling us to be about me. But in reality, what we see is the couples who can kind of foster this sort of virtuous cycle of we before me are more likely to be flourishing.
Yeah, I think about my favorite verse on marriage is in Romans 12:10, where it talks about outdo one another in showing honor. Mm-hmm. And if you had a marriage that was committed to both of those mutually going, I'm going to show you more honor. No, I'm going to show you more honor. It's amazing what Jesus says. It's like when you lose your life, you actually gain it, the very thing that we want. But if you go into marriage going, what can I get out of this? And how can this person improve my life? Then you're just set up for failure. You do have one caveat on this that I want to read to you, Dr. Wilcox, because I think it's important just for people to hear this. There's one big caveat to all this marriage, Marriages where sacrifice seemed to go largely in just one direction. Back in the day, in all too many marriages, the spirit of sacrifice often went chiefly in one direction, usually from wife to husband. When this spirit of sacrifice is not mutual, marriages can run aground. Anything you'd want to add on that? Because I just think that's important to mention here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's pretty self-evident, but, I think both in terms of like the classic gender norms that we would see in older generations oftentimes, that's part of the issue. We don't want to have this just about the wife sacrificing. But I think it's also important to just add that a lot of these patterns I think are pretty visible to people who are watching a couple when they're in the dating phase. And so it may not be kind of, I think, apparent to the couple themselves. So what I would say to folks who are dating is just to kind of be, sharing your relationship with your friends and family members and just kind of get some feedback from them at some point, some honest feedback from people you trust. And, open your ears. And if they're kind of sensing that, one party to this relationship is not all in and is not generous, they probably can see that more than you can. And if they say that, you should pay attention.
It's good. And obviously this matters not just for us as a married couple, but it's the next generation, right? How do we pass this on? So what did some of your research find about how marriages impact children?
So I think it's important for us to sort of understand and appreciate. There's been a lot of discussion lately about how many of our boys and young men are kind of floundering. I talk about kind of like the male malaise, but this is heavily kind of contingent on the family. And what I find, and this is really the most striking thing that I found for the kids in this book, is that boys who are raised apart from an intact family are more likely to land in jail or in prison than they are to graduate from college. I mean, just like striking finding, right? And by contrast, boys who are raised in an intact family with their mom and dad, in their corner with them and for them, are 4 times more likely to graduate from college than they are to end up in prison or in jail. So we have to understand and appreciate, and I was raised by a single mom, and obviously there are plenty of folks who do just fine, right, in a variety of family forms, but one core purpose, obviously, of marriage is to kind of provide the ideal context for the rearing of our kids. And so when times are tough in your marriage, I think it's just kind of worth remembering that, one reason you're fighting for your marriage to succeed and to move beyond this particular difficult moment or chapter or month, whatever it might be, is that your kids are more likely to flourish if you can kind of find a way to make it work.
Wow. And that's really what it's all about. Just going back to what you said about that young woman, it's like, if we could have the guarantee my marriage would work, we all would want it. And the truth of the matter is what you've discovered, and Shaunti, your research has pointed to, is actually there's a lot more benefits, and there's a lot more it's actually not easier than you think it is, but there's plenty of wisdom that's out there.
Yeah.
The secret of wisdom is this, the beginning of wisdom is this, as said in Proverbs 4:25. Look for wisdom, hunt for, and the word is hunt.
Yes, it's there.
And it's there, and it's there in books like this, where just, again, it backs up everything that God has put in the Bible.
And I would encourage people to also go, okay, how can I help others who have been discouraged? Mm-hmm. How can I pass these along? I can't tell you how many times once I've told a pastor, for example, like you used to be a pastor, right? Once I've told a pastor, no, the rate of divorce is not the same in the church, like that. And they go, really? And then I hear like a year later, I've told 40 other pastors that, because encouragement spreads, and this is truth that needs to spread.
Yep. So Brad, I know that if you get married, it doesn't guarantee happiness.
Right.
But what you're saying is that people that are married are more likely to be happy. Would it be fair to say that?
Totally. So what we see is that on average, folks who are married are about twice as likely to be very happy compared to unmarried Americans. And what's also striking here in the data that I've looked at for this book is that there's no factor that's as powerful in predicting being happy with your life in general than a good marriage. Actually not religious attendance, not work, not money, not regular sex. I mean, nothing in the data set predicts happiness for your kind of life in general like a good marriage. And I think what we see, for instance, in Pew polling is that a lot of Americans think that really it's a good job, a fulfilling job is going to be the ticket.
Right.
But that's not true. I mean, the most powerful predictor is a good family life, a good marriage, and of course, friendships are incredibly important as well.
Wow. And again, not to say that singles can't experience a great joy and happiness in life and that God orchestrates that for many, but it is good news for those of us that have that opportunity and that gift that God gives as a spouse. And honestly, you're calming me right now, Brad. My text that I got today from my 21-year-old son, like literally 5 minutes before we're about to have this podcast, I'm about to ask for my girlfriend's dad's blessing.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
To get married. And I'm like, you don't know what your job's going to be yet. I'm sitting here going, I'm worried about job. I'm worried about how he's going to live. He's going to graduate next year. And I'm just all nervous. And so honestly, this is kind of calling me a little bit. It's
That's awesome.
You know what? He'll probably do better if he's got a good person beside him.
Oh, totally. Men are a lot more productive when they're married than when they're single. Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, good. I feel better now. I'll give him this book. It's okay, son. Get married.
Okay.
Well, Brad, it's been a privilege to have you on. Thanks for joining us, not only for this podcast, but for also contributing to season 4 of Married with Benefits. We really appreciate that. Best of just God's blessings on talk. You're in the crosshairs.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and so. Has there been a ton of pushback? I'll just ask you anything we can be praying for you, just because I know that you're going on, you're New York Times, you're in all the news channels. What's been your pushback or your struggle that we could be praying for you about?
Yeah, I think it's kind of surprising. There hasn't been a pushback yet, and I would say yet. I'm just waiting for that pushback to come, and we'll see what happens. But I think one thing that's sort of really apparent now is no one really can dispute that kids are more likely to flourish in an intact married home. No one can dispute that married men and women are happier and more financially secure. So maybe part of it is just that kind of the kinds of people who actually know the data, even if they don't necessarily like my emphasis or way of talking about it, have to at least acknowledge that today married men and women and their kids are more likely to be flourishing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for writing a piece that is incredibly important to our culture at this time. It really does stand in the gap and push back against all the negativity that's been around marriage. And it really helps show us that we can be married and experience the benefits that God had in saying I do. And it's not just a data book either. That's the thing that I really liked about it. Like, you're giving great tips along the way. I know you're not a trained psychologist or a marriage counselor, but you can actually, you must have slept at a Holiday Inn Express, because you actually, if anybody remember that old commercial, you actually give us some great wisdom about how we can experience those benefits. So thanks for doing that. We really appreciate you, Brad.
Well, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate being with you guys.
All right, Shaunti. Well, we look forward to not only what we just experienced, which was incredible.
Amazing.
But
you see why I'm fangirling?
I can tell. And now I'm going to be a fanboy from here on out. But I just think... I think what he talks about is really a great setup for, now we're going to unpack what do those highly happy couples that are experiencing joy, what do they do on a regular basis? And that's really what season 4 is all about. Thanks for joining us on this special preview episode of Family Life's Married with Benefits. Go ahead and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we're going to have full episodes on YouTube. So you'll want to subscribe to Family Life's YouTube channel, and you'll be able to get notified every time a new episode drops. Season 4 is right around the corner. Make sure you catch every episode of Season 4 of Married with Benefits.